Last night, Meghan Markle's appearance on The Late Show with Stephen Colbert turned explosive. A fiery clash over her royal exit and media tactics spiraled into chaos, ending with Meghan storming off, set in a shocking showdown. The studio lights blazed down on the sleek set of The Late Show, the audience buzzing with anticipation as Stephen Colbert leaned forward in his chair, his signature grin sharp but welcoming. Across from him sat Meghan Markle, poised in a tailored navy dress, her smile polished but guarded. The crowd's applause faded, and the air crackled with the promise of a big interview. Colbert, known for his wit and ability to coax candid moments from guests, started with the usual pleasantries, complimenting her recent charity work and her Netflix projects. But the tone shifted fast when he pivoted to the elephant in the room: her departure from the royal family and the media storm that followed. "So, Meghan," Colbert began, his voice light but probing, "you've been vocal about your struggles with the royal institution, but some say you've played the victim card a bit too hard. Care to set the record straight?" The question landed like a match in dry grass. The audience murmured, sensing the edge in his tone. Meghan's smile tightened, her eyes narrowing slightly as she adjusted her posture. "I think it's interesting," she replied, her voice measured but laced with defiance, "that people are so quick to judge without understanding the full context. We faced real challenges, systemic issues, not just personal gripes." Her words were careful, but the undercurrent of frustration was unmistakable. Colbert tilted his head, his grin fading into something more skeptical. "Sure, systemic issues," he said, leaning back. "But let's talk about the narrative you've crafted since. The Oprah interview, the docu-series, the book deals. Some critics and even some fans say it feels like a calculated PR campaign, like you're curating a story to keep the spotlight on you." The audience gasped softly, a few clapping in agreement. Meghan's jaw clenched, her composure slipping, for a split second before she recovered. "Calculated?" she shot back, her tone sharper now. "Stephen, I think it's unfair to reduce our efforts to tell our truth to some kind of publicity stunt. We've been honest about our experiences, and if that makes people uncomfortable, that's their problem." Her voice rose slightly and the crowd stirred, sensing the tension building. Colbert didn't back down, his eyes locked on hers. "Honest, sure," he said, his voice still calm but cutting. "But let's be real. Your truth has made you a lot of money and kept you in the headlines. Some say you're less about accountability and more about settling scores. Is that fair?" The question hung in the air, and the audience leaned forward, riveted. Meghan's hands clasped tightly in her lap, her knuckles whitening. "I don't think you get to decide what's fair," she said, her voice low but venomous. "We've been hounded, scrutinized, and lied about for years. If we're speaking out, it's because we have to, not because we want to." The crowd was split, some cheering her defiance, others murmuring disapproval. Colbert raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. "Hounded, yeah," he said, his tone now openly skeptical. "But you've also leaned into the drama, haven't you? I mean, the timing of your projects, the leaks, the carefully worded statements. It's hard to argue that's not strategic." He paused, letting the words sink in. "Or are you saying it's all just coincidence?" The audience erupted in a mix of gasps and applause, the energy in the room electric. Meghan's face flushed, her eyes flashing with barely contained anger. "Stephen, with all due respect," she said, her voice tight, "you're sitting here, in your comfortable studio, with your comfortable job, and you're accusing me of playing games? You don't know what it's like to be targeted the way we have." Her words were sharp, almost accusatory, and the crowd's reaction grew louder, some booing, others cheering. Colbert didn't flinch, his gaze steady. "I'm not accusing," he said, his voice cool but firm. "I'm asking, because a lot of people out there, your fans included, are wondering if this is about truth or if it's about control." Control over the narrative. Control over the headlines. He leaned forward, his voice dropping. So which is it, Meghan? The audience held its breath, the silence deafening. Meghan's lips parted, but no words came out immediately. Her eyes darted to the side, as if calculating her next move. The tension was palpable, the studio lights feeling hotter, the crowd's murmurs growing restless. Meghan leaned forward, her voice low and deliberate. You want to talk about control, Stephen? Let's talk about how the media twists everything we say. Let's talk about how people like you amplify that. The accusation landed like a slap, and the audience roared, some in support, others in outrage. Colbert's smile vanished entirely, his eyes narrowing as he prepared to fire back. The confrontation was spiraling, and it was clear neither was backing down. What would happen next? Would Meghan hold her ground, or would this clash push her to the edge? The studio crackled with raw energy, the audience's roars fading into a tense hum as Stephen Colbert leaned forward, his eyes locked on Meghan Markle. Her accusation hung in the air, sharp and personal, accusing him of fueling the media frenzy she claimed to despise. The lights seemed to burn brighter, the set shrinking around them as the confrontation teetered on a knife's edge. Colbert's fingers tapped lightly on his desk, a rare tell of his rising irritation, but his voice stayed steady, cutting through the noise. People like me, he said, his tone icy but controlled. Meghan, I ask questions for a living. I give you a platform to tell your side. But when every answer feels like a press release, it's hard not to wonder if you're dodging the real issue. The audience gasped, a few clapping sharply while others hissed in disapproval. Meghan's face tightened, her eyes blazing with a mix of defiance and fury. Dodging, she shot back, her voice rising, each word deliberate. I'm here, aren't I? Facing your questions, your insinuations in front of a live audience. If that's dodging, then what's this show, Stephen? A courtroom? The crowd erupted, some cheering her boldness, others booing her tone. A man in the front row shouted, Tell him, Meghan, while another yelled, Answer the question. The chaos threatened to derail the segment, but Colbert raised a hand, quieting the room with a practiced ease. Let's keep it civil, he said, his voice calm but firm, though his eyes never left hers. You say the media twists your words, but you've been strategic too. The leaks to friendly outlets, the curated interviews. Come on, Meghan, you're not new to this game. Why not own it? His words were a challenge, daring her to admit, to orchestrating her narrative. The audience leaned in, breathless, sensing blood in the water. Meghan's lips pressed into a thin line, her hands gripping the arms of her chair. You're implying I'm manipulative, she said, her voice low but trembling with barely restrained anger. But you're the one framing this like I'm on trial. I came here to talk about my work, my causes, not to be dissected for clicks. Her words were pointed, accusing him of exploiting her for ratings. The crowd murmured, split between sympathy and skepticism. Colbert didn't blink. This show's about real talk, not just promo, he said, his tone sharp now. You want to talk causes? Great. But you can't ignore the context. You've built a brand on your royal exit, and every move feels calculated to keep that story alive. Is that wrong? The question was a gut punch, and the audience roared again, the noise swelling like a wave. Meghan's eyes flashed, her composure fraying as she leaned closer, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You think you know my story? She said, each word laced with venom. You think you can sum up years of scrutiny, of threats, of losing our privacy, in a soundbite? You're not asking questions, Stephen. You're pushing a narrative. The accusation was a mirror, turning his own words back on him. The crowd's reaction was deafening, cheers, boos, and shouts colliding in a chaotic symphony. A woman in the back yelled, She's right, while another voice countered, Stop playing the victim. Colbert's jaw tightened, but he kept his cool, leaning back slightly as if to reset the moment. "I'm pushing a narrative?" he said, his voice calm but laced with sarcasm. "Meghan, you've made a career out of telling your story on your terms. But when someone asks hard questions, suddenly it's an attack. Why can't you handle the pushback?" The audience gasped, the tension spiking as his words cut deep. Meghan's face flushed, her eyes darting to the crowd, then back to him. "Pushback," she said, her voice rising again, sharp and unsteady. "This isn't pushback. This is you twisting my words to fit your show's agenda. You invited me. Here, but you're ambushing me." Her voice cracked on the last word, and the audience's reaction was instant. Half cheering her passion, half jeering her defensiveness. Colbert raised an eyebrow, unfazed, but the glint in his eye suggested he was ready to escalate. "Ambushing?" he said, his tone almost mocking now. "You're a pro at this, Meghan. You've done Oprah, Netflix, podcasts. You don't get to cry ambush when the questions get tough." The crowd roared, the divide growing sharper. Meghan's hands trembled, slightly, her polished facade cracking under the pressure. She opened her mouth to respond, but Colbert cut in, his voice rising for the first time. "Let's be honest. Aren't you here to sell your story just like always?" The question was a bombshell, and the audience exploded, the noise swallowing the set. Meghan's eyes widened, her breath catching as the accusation landed. Would she fire back, or was this the moment that would break her? The studio was a pressure cooker, the audience's roars crashing like thunder as Stephen Colbert's words, accusing Meghan Markle of peddling her story, hung in the air. Her eyes, wide with shock, narrowed into a steely glare, her breath steadying as she gripped the arms of her chair. The crowd's noise didn't faze her now. It fueled her. She leaned forward, her voice low and cutting, each word a deliberate strike. "Sell my story, Stephen? You think I'm here for profit? You think that's what this is about?" Her tone was sharp, almost trembling with rage, but controlled, like a blade held steady. The audience hushed, sensing a shift, their murmurs fading into a tense silence. Colbert, unfazed, tilted his head, his lips curling into a half-smile that was more challenge than charm. "Come on, Meghan," he said, his voice smooth but laced with skepticism. "Your brand thrives on this drama. Every interview, every project, it's all built on the same narrative. You against the world. Are you saying that's not by design?" The crowd erupted again, some cheering his audacity, others booing his persistence. A woman shouted, "Leave her alone," while a man countered, "She's dodging again." The divide was stark, the room a battleground of loyalties. Meghan's face flushed, her eyes flashing with defiance. "You're so quick to judge," she said, her voice rising, each word punctuated with barely restrained fury. "You sit here, smug, acting like you've cracked the code on my life, but you don't know what it's like to be silenced, to have your truth twisted by people who profit off lies." Her accusation was a direct hit, turning the tables on him. The audience gasped, some clapping wildly, others muttering in disapproval. Colbert's smile faltered, his fingers twitching on the desk as he absorbed the blow. "Silenced?" he said, his voice steady but edged with irritation. "Meghan, you've had more airtime than most. Oprah, Spotify, Netflix. You're hardly voiceless. But every time someone challenges your narrative, you pivot to victimhood. Why is that?" The question was a dagger, and the crowd's reaction was instant, cheers and jeers colliding in a chaotic wave. Meghan's hands clenched, her knuckles white, as she leaned closer, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You think this is a game, don't you?" she said, her eyes locked on his. "You think you can sit there, throw accusations and call it journalism? This isn't about truth for you, Stephen. This is about ratings, about making a spectacle." The audience roared, the noise swelling as her words cut deep. A man in the crowd yelled, "She's calling him out," while another shouted, "Stop whining! The set felt like it was vibrating, the tension so thick it was suffocating. Colbert's eyes narrowed, his composure slipping for a moment as he leaned forward, his voice sharp. A spectacle? Meghan, you've made your life a public saga. You can't walk into a talk show and expect softball questions when your every move is a headline. He paused, letting the words sink in. You say I'm chasing ratings? Look in the mirror. You've been chasing attention since you left the palace. The crowd exploded, the noise deafening as some chanted his name. Others booed loudly. Meghan's face went rigid, her breath catching as the accusation landed like a slap. You're unbelievable, she said, her voice trembling with rage, her polished facade crumbling. You invite me here, pretend it's a conversation, then attack me for clicks. You're no better than the tabloids you claim to mock. Her words were venomous, her eyes burning with betrayal. The audience was a storm now, shouts and applause clashing as the confrontation spiraled. Colbert raised, a hand trying to calm the crowd, but his eyes stayed on Meghan, his voice steady but cold. Attack you? He said, his tone almost incredulous. I'm asking what millions are thinking. Are you here to share, or are you here to spin? Because every answer feels like a deflection. The crowd roared again, the energy chaotic, some cheering his bluntness, others jeering his aggression. Meghan's lips parted, her breath quickening as she fought to keep her composure. Deflection, she said, her voice rising, cracking with emotion. I'm trying to survive a world that's been tearing me apart for years, and you're calling that deflection? The audience was on its feet now, the noise overwhelming, a mix of support and scorn. Colbert leaned back, his expression unreadable, but his eyes glinted with something dangerous, a mix of frustration and determination. Survive, he said, his voice low, almost mocking. You're thriving, Meghan, but you can't handle it when someone calls you out. Why is that? The question was a spark in a powder keg, and the crowd's reaction was seismic, the studio shaking with their shouts. Meghan's face was a mask of fury, her hands trembling as she prepared to fire back. The clash was at its peak, and the breaking point was near. Would she explode, or would she walk away? The studio was a cauldron of chaos, the audience's shouts reverberating off the walls as Meghan Markle's fury met Stephen Colbert's unrelenting gaze. His taunt, "You're thriving, Meghan, but you can't handle it when someone calls you out. Why is that?" Hung like a guillotine slicing through the air, Meghan's hands shook, her eyes blazing with a mix of rage and betrayal, her polished exterior shattered. The crowd was a fractured sea, half chanting her name, half jeering her silence, waiting for her to strike back or crumble. She leaned forward, her voice trembling but resolute, each word a defiant arrow aimed at Colbert. "Call me out," she said, her voice low and venomous, rising above the din. "You're not calling me out, Stephen. You're putting on a show, tearing me down for applause. You think you're clever, but you're just another cog in the machine that's been after me from the start." The accusation was a grenade, and the audience exploded, cheers and boos clashing in a deafening roar. A woman shouted, "She's right, Stephen," while another voice yelled, "Stop playing the victim." The noise was a living thing, pulsing through the set. Colbert's eyes narrowed, his fingers gripping the edge of his desk, his calm facade cracking. "A cog?" he said, his voice sharp, cutting through the chaos. "Meghan, I'm giving you a chance to explain yourself, but all you've done is dodge and deflect. If you're so tired of the machine, why do you keep feeding it with every interview, every project?" The crowd roared again, some clapping wildly, others hissing in disapproval. His words were a challenge, daring her to confront her own contradictions. Meghan's face flushed, her breath quickening as she leaned closer, her voice a razor's edge. "You want to know why?" she said, her tone icy, each word deliberate. "Because I have to. Because if I don't tell my story, someone else will, and they'll lie. You think I love this? You think I want to be here, dissected for your audience's entertainment? Her voice cracked, raw with emotion, and the crowd's reaction softened, some murmuring in sympathy. But Colbert didn't relent. His eyes locked on hers. His voice, steady but cold. "Entertainment?" he said, his tone almost incredulous. "You're the one who's made your life a global drama, Meghan. You can't walk onto my stage and act shocked when I ask you to own it. You say you're fighting lies, but you're crafting a narrative just as much as anyone else." The audience erupted, the noise a tidal wave, some chanting his name, others shouting in defense of Meghan. Her hands clenched into fists, her eyes glistening with unshed tears, but her jaw was set, her resolve unbroken. "You're twisting everything," she said, her voice trembling with fury, rising to a shout. "You invited me here, promised a fair conversation, then ambushed me with the same tired accusations. You're not interested in truth. You're interested in a fight." The crowd was on its feet, the noise seismic, a mix of support and scorn. A man yelled, "Go, Meghan!" while another shouted, "Answer him!" Colbert leaned back, his expression unreadable, but his eyes burned with a mix of frustration and defiance. "A fight?" he said, his voice low, almost mocking. "I'm asking questions, Meghan. The same ones your critics and some of your fans are asking. If you can't handle them, maybe you're not as ready for this spotlight as you think." The words were a final blow, and the audience's reaction was deafening, the studio shaking with their shouts. Meghan's face went pale, her breath hitching as she stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "That's it," she said, her voice shaking but resolute. "I didn't come here to be your punching bag." She ripped off her microphone, the feedback screeching through the studio, and tossed it onto the desk. The crowd gasped, some cheering, others booing, as she turned to the audience, her eyes blazing. "You want a villain? Fine. But I'm done letting people like him twist my story." Her words were a defiant farewell, and she stormed toward the stage's edge, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. Colbert stood, his voice rising over the chaos. "Meghan, come on, let's talk this out." But she didn't stop, her figure disappearing into the wings as the audience's roars reached a fever pitch. The cameras panned to Colbert, who shook his head, a mix of exasperation and resignation on his face. "Well, folks," he said, forcing a wry smile, "that's one way to end an interview." The crowd's noise didn't fade. A storm of cheers, boos, and shouts echoing as the show cut to commercial. The stage was empty, the tension lingering like smoke, and Meghan was gone, leaving the world to dissect the clash that had just set the internet ablaze.